Thanks for the wonderful introduction as well. I'm going to be very brief because I want my colleagues to have as much time as possible. I will tackle two questions very briefly. How weak is the Russian state? We talked a little bit about this yesterday at the conference. I think it's worthwhile to reiterate some of the factors that we covered. And secondly, what would be, because we're here, what would be the most effective US policy in managing Russia's coming convulsions? So let's start with the Russian state. I think on all the evidence that I've seen, the Russian state is showing numerous signs of stress, decline, and crisis. The economy is beginning to experience a sharpening slowdown. Growth figures from what I saw for the first quarter are way below what was projected. Military expenditure will reach a third, if not more, Ilya can correct me, of the federal budget, with resources diverted from other shrinking economic sectors. Moscow's revenues, again it was stressed yesterday, are largely dependent on the sale of oil and gas. With the prices steadily falling, we'll see temporarily with the attack on Iran, how that's going to impact on oil prices. Russia does benefit from that, but in any case, I think that could be a short-term thing. Russia's National Wealth Fund, which is this reserve fund that they've accumulated during years of booming prices, booming oil exports, is greatly depleted, and some are forecasting that it could be actually gone by the end of this year. All these factors, I think, will have dire consequences for financing the war, for social spending, and that in turn, I believe, will undermine domestic stability. Moscow continues, in terms of the war itself in Ukraine, Moscow continues to rely on poorly trained infantry in order to capture very small tracts of land. And over the past 24, 48 hours, the figure of 1 million losses, casualties, dead and wounded of the Russian forces have been reached. And this year looks like it's going to be the deadliest, with something like, I saw a figure yesterday, 1,100 to 1,200 a day killed or incapacitated on the front. So, you know, at this rate, you know, the idea of taking Kiev, by the time they reach Kiev, there'll be no Russians left. I mean, I don't think there's going to be that much progress in any case, because if we continue to arm Ukraine, Ukraine can handle this. They can afford to lose little bits of territory, but inflict enormous damage, not just on the military, but also on their equipment. Particularly the losses of tanks and armored vehicles and now aviation, plus the Black Sea Fleet, has been staggering. A point about regime change in Moscow. Russia always looks very quiet and stable until it isn't. And political struggles in Russia tend to explode suddenly. You know, I would say the RF is as secretive as the USSR. And, you know, Kremlinology was never an exact science. So we don't know all the battles that are taking place under the surface. But I think we saw a little bit of sign of this with Prigozhin, which was more of a public event. And I think Putin's people have tried not to allow any such public conflicts. But I'm sure under the surface, a lot is going on. Interesting, Carnegie issued a report a few weeks ago about the elite that's looking already to the post-Putin period, fearful that as revenues shrink, their cut of the pie is going to shrink, that they're going to lose their resources and positions allocated now by the Kremlin. So some are actually trying to establish their own connections and coalitions, still a bit informal, and as I said, under the surface, how they're going to survive beyond the Putin era. But this, you know, this in itself, I think, undermines the foundations of Putinism, which isn't like communism that had a certain successors, there was a certain structure. This is a very personalistic authoritarian regime which can collapse overnight, and you don't build a regime like that overnight. Nobody's going to step in tomorrow and say, okay, I'm the new Putin, you're going to have to follow me like you followed him. And as I mentioned yesterday, I think we have this strange idea that Russians always follow Moscow. No, not the case. I think Russians, and we saw this during the civil wars, in the 1920s, they follow those who seem to be stronger, who can ultimately ensure them a measure of security and a measure of economic stability.